Welcome to Fitness and Consciousness. I'm your host, Ryan Hadley. Today's episode is called Deer Heart Chakra. It's a play on words. Deer are the animals symbolic of the heart chakra, and it kind of sounds like a letter to the heart chakra. Maybe that's yours, or maybe you're writing to someone else's. You're sending a message to someone else's, and where is that coming from? I'm going to talk about this realization that I had on what I used to call a mini vision quest, but now I think I'll just call them vision quest because oftentimes they end up being pretty powerful, even though they it's just over a relatively short amount of time, over like a few hours. I'm also going to read a couple poems, a few poems maybe. Some of them may have to do with Halloween. Today is October 30th, so it is 8:14 at night right now in Indianapolis. And this show's not going to be just like a Halloween show or anything. A lot of people listen months after the shows come out, and so I most of the time they're not time sensitive things. Uh, so there will be a few subjects that I cover, a few stories. I think I just mentioned it was my dad's birthday today. He would have been 68. He died in 2005. And I may talk a little bit about that. I don't have this show. I have a lot of things planned, but I don't have it all word for word planned as usual. So we'll just kind of see what happens. But I'm going to talk about him and a couple of the poems that he read to me, and just kind of like what I learned from him dying in 2005, and he would have been 68 today. So part of that is we don't know how much time we get here. So do what you want. Um, well, pretty much do what you want. And don't waste time, I guess, is the big message. Like if you're, yeah, don't waste time. And the last year and a half or so, he had cancer, and so he knew his days were numbered. And he wrote a lot of songs, and he played and recorded a lot of songs. He could sing. He sounded kind of like Elvis, and he'd play Elvis songs. He'd play guitar, and most of the time he did it by himself, though. And I mean, there were times when he was in bands, and there were times when him and I would pass the guitar back and forth. But since I was a real little kid, I don't really remember him singing. And there were times when, like in high school, sometimes I lived with my dad my junior and senior year, and my place was the place to go after school, or sometimes instead of school. And we would it was kind of like Woodstock every day, pretty much. And sometimes my dad would play guitar, and I would usually have the radio going in my room, jamming some Pink Floyd or some Grateful Dead or some band. And then we'd hear his amplifier turn on, and we would turn my music off and listen to him play. And we'd be in my room, and he'd be out in the living room playing. And so when he knew that he was going to die, he started recording a bunch of songs. And so it inspires me to not waste time. And so sometimes I might seem like I'm in a hurry for things, and that's going to be part of the theme for later, the dear heart chakra. So I was going on this, what I called at the time, a mini vision quest. A friend of mine's birthday was coming up, and I wanted to do something special. And there was a time when she was more than a friend. And then at this time, we were just friends. And it also kind of looked like we might end up being more than friends again. So she's a very private person, and I'm going to be try not to be too specific. I know that most of you listening wouldn't even know who she was if I said exactly, but I'm going to try to keep it as anonymous as possible to respect that privacy that she likes. So her birthday is coming up, and she had two people die that meant a lot to her shortly before. And I didn't really have anything, what could I do about that? But so I go to a cemetery, and I go there quite a bit when I want to see deer. And it's one of the biggest cemeteries in the country. It's like maybe the 12th biggest or 14th biggest or something like that. It's called Crown Hill Cemetery, and that's happens to be where James Wickham Riley was buried. And I'm going to be reading one of his poems. And James Wickham Riley was a poet from Greenfield, Indiana. I used to live in Greenfield, and that was where we lived when my friends would come over and we'd listen to my dad play. So I was at the cemetery, and I wanted to get this friend of mine a feather. And she's the kind of person, if you give her a feather, it means something. And so I went and I was looking all over for a feather, and I was trying to find my vision of what else to do. And I couldn't find a feather. Usually, there's feathers all over the place. Birds fly over that place all the time. There's all kinds of really cool trees there too, and a lot of them have name tags on them, like they're at a some kind of a get together. Hello, black walnut tree. So I'm walking around, and I didn't see any feathers, and I'm just trying to find out what I'm supposed to do. And then it dawned on me what I should do. And I think I'll just say my idea was to arrange a sweat lodge for her, which means I had to ask my friend to do that. He arranges them, he does them, he holds them, leads them. And you can't just do it by yourself. You have to have someone bring in the stones. You have to have, it's kind of a thing. So it's usually at least two people that are going to be holding it. And so my idea was to put this together and for it to be a surprise. But he didn't want, he told me that it's not a good idea to have it just be a surprise. She has done a lot of sweat lodges. I've only done like 5 or so. They're like Lakota style, and but he said not to surprise her, to tell her what was going on. So I did. But anyways, so when I was walking around the cemetery, and I always walk around barefoot, and I couldn't find the feathers, but I did see the deer. It's not a big surprise. I can usually just kind of feel where they are and just go to them. Sometimes it takes a while, but I can usually just kind of feel them, feel the direction I need to go. And I decided to um, have a seat on this stone bench that somebody put by another grave. And I was sitting by, I think there was usually around 4 deer, a couple young ones, a couple older ones, male, female, and they were just kind of hanging out around me. And with the deer, they would often walk towards me, and I would walk towards them. And I would make sure that I stopped before they turned and ran away. I didn't want to scare them. I just wanted to hang out with them, and not just to see how close I could get, but in a way to see how close I could get. You know, the different kind of close, literal and figurative, really. But I don't push it. I don't want them to be uncomfortable. And when I go up to them, or even if I'm at a distance and I'm just walking by, I'll often make like a sound, just to see if they can remember me. And I don't know if they do or not, but it kind of seems like it, because they don't seem to be worried about me. So I'm sitting on this bench and I'm looking at the deer, and I'm reminded of, I had recently read about deer being symbolic of the heart chakra. It was in some yoga book, some yoga philosophy book, or I don't even remember which one it was. And I probably read that in 50 different books over the last 20 years or so, but it never really resonated with me. I read it, but it didn't, it's just, okay, deer, symbolic of the heart chakra, got it. And I don't really remember putting much thought into it until this moment. And it was kind of like when these like realizations come, it's like this instant download of a lot of information. So it's not like this thing that I think about for a long time and come to a conclusion after a long time. It's like all at once, here it is. And then now you take a bunch of time to like sort out and think through this realization and put it into words and thoughts. And so what do deer have to do with the heart chakra? And I realized that when, say, you're starting a relationship with someone, if you're a man and you're interested in a woman, if you're too forward, if you're too, if you just like run up to her, just like the deer, she's probably going to run away. So maybe you could say like she's like a deer. And so this friend of mine, who had been more than a friend at a time, has a kind of a deer spirit. And interestingly enough, I've always had a thing for deer. They would eat out of my hands when I was a little kid. So, but the deer are interested in me also. They walk up to me. They can clearly see me. It's highly unlikely that you're going to sneak up on one. They know you're coming, even if they don't look at you, but they'll probably look at you. Their ears will point towards you, and you definitely are in their awareness. They'll walk towards me because they're curious, but you get too close and they run away. So they can see that I'm not exactly a deer, but maybe I have some deer in me, a little bit of a deer spirit, but there's also maybe this tiger spirit. And so I did a show. I alluded to some things in the show I called King of Her Jungle. And King of the Jungle is often thought of as a lion, but there's not really lions in a jungle, but there's tigers. But anyways, So that usually man is a threat to the deer or to women. And these things were all kind of, it all just flooded into my head at once, this instant download. And I'm not sure how well I can even articulate it, but I realized that at first, like, so the deer and me will walk towards each other at the same time, but then they stop and then run off. And then so even if like you're in a relationship, even if you're walking towards each other at the same time and you're both interested, then all of a sudden maybe she gets spooked. Maybe she saw a little bit of the tiger, or maybe you reminded her of another tiger, or maybe who knows what else it could be. So what do you do if you're a man and you're wanting to get closer to the deer or and I think as long as it's not a game, because they can tell. Sometimes it takes a while to tell, and they get tricked. But if you're coming from the heart and you're aiming at theirs with yours, then eventually that message will be received. And perhaps it'll work, perhaps it won't, but that's the way to go after it. Too many times the tiger goes after the deer with bad intentions. And so if you have the tiger with the more of a deer spirit, or you have the man that really has good intentions, he kind of has to tread lightly, take the time. And if they start to back away, then don't chase, because it's going to be more chasing. So you have to just show that it's okay to come back and try again. I'm going to move on to a poem from James Whitcomb Riley. It was at this cemetery that I had this realization from this vision quest. And his grave, I've written on his grave. Not I've written like on a pad of paper while sitting at his grave, I should say. And it was a story, and I'll probably tell that story in just a little bit. I'll tell some of the story. But this poem is from James Whitcomb Riley. He's from Greenfield, Indiana. He lived from 1849 to 1916. Little orphan Annie come to our house to stay, and wash the cups and saucers up and brush the crumbs away, and shoo the chickens off the porch and dust the hearth and sweep, and make a fire and bake the bread and earn her board and keep. And all us other children, when the supper things is done, we set around the kitchen fire and has the mostest fun, and listening to the witch tales that Annie tells about, and the goblins'll get you if you don't watch out. Once there was a little boy who wouldn't say his prayers. So when he went to bed at night, away upstairs, his mama heard him holler and his daddy heard him bawl. And when they turned the covers down, he wasn't there at all. And they seeked him in the rafter room and cubby hole and press, and seeked him up the chimney flue and everywheres, I guess. But all they ever found was his pants and roundabout, and the goblins'll get you if you don't watch out. And one time a little girl would laugh and grin and make fun of everyone and all her blood and kin. And once there was company and old folks was there, she mocked him and shocked him and said she didn't care. And this she kicked her heels and turned to run and hide. There was two great big black things a standing by her side, and they snatched her through the ceiling, for she knew what she's about. And the goblins will get you if you don't watch out. And little Orphan Annie says, when the blaze is blue, and the lamp wick sputters, and the wind goes woo, and you hear the crickets quit, and the moon is gray, and the lightning bugs and dew is all squinched away. You better mind your parents and your teachers fond and dear, and cherish them that loves you, and dry the orphan's tear. And help the poor and needy ones in clusters all about, or the goblins will get you if you don't watch out. My mom used to read that to me when I was a kid. And a little Halloween thing for you, a little change of pace, kind of connected just because it's Wickham Riley. And I was at the cemetery when I had that realization about the deer and the heart chakra. So I hope that heart chakra thing makes sense. And if it doesn't, well, maybe it will sometime. And whether you believe in actual chakras or not, I don't think it really matters. Or it might matter. It might, if it's true, it matters. But some things are more true than facts. So, yeah. So this is a poem, I think, sort of a, not really a Halloween thing, but kind of a Halloween thing, kind of it being, well, I'll just read it. This one's called The Highwayman. And my dad used to read this one. And when I get done with this, I'm going to tell a different story of my own. But this is probably the last poem that I'll read that's somebody else's. The Highwayman by Alfred Noyes, 1880 to 1958. The wind was a torrent of darkness among the gusty trees. The moon was a ghostly galleon tossed upon the seas. The road was a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor, and the highwayman came riding, riding, riding. The highwayman came riding up to the old inn door. He'd a French-cocked hat on his forehead, a bunch of lace at his chin, a coat of the claret velvet, and breeches of brown doe skin. They fitted with never a wrinkle. His boots were up to the thigh, and he rode with a jeweled twinkle, his pistol butts a twinkle, his rapier hilt a twinkle under the jeweled sky. Over the cobbles he clattered and clashed in the dark inn yard. He tapped with his whip on the shutters, but all was locked and barred. He whistled a tune to the window, who should be waiting there, but the landlord's black-eyed daughter, Bess, the landlord's daughter, plaiting a dark red love knot into her long black hair. And in the dark old inn yard, a stable wicket creaked, where Tim the ostler listened. His face was white and peaked. His eyes were hollows of madness, his hair like moldy hay, but he loved the landlord's daughter, the landlord's red-lipped daughter. Dumb as a dog he listened, and he heard the robber say, "One kiss, my bonny sweetheart. I'm after a prize tonight, but I shall be back with the yellow gold before the morning light. Yet if they press me sharply and harry me through the day, then look for me by moonlight. Watch for me by moonlight. I'll come to thee by moonlight, though hell should bar the way." He rose upright in the stirrups. He scarce could reach her hand, but he loosened her hair in the casement. Her face burnt like a brand, and the black cascade of perfume came tumbling over his breast, and he kissed its waves in the moonlight. Oh, sweet black waves in the moonlight. Then he tugged at his rein in the moonlight, and galloped to the west. He did not come in the dawning, he did not come at noon, and out of the tawny sunset before the rise of the moon. When the road was a gypsy's ribbon looping the purple moor, a redcoat troop came marching, marching, marching. King George's men came marching up to the old inn door. They said no word to the landlord, they drank his ale instead, but they gagged his daughter and bound her to the foot of her narrow bed. Two of them knelt at her casement, with muskets at their side. There was death at every window, and hell at one dark window, for Bess could see through her casement the road that he would ride. They had tied her up to attention with many a snaggering jest. They had bound a musket beside her with the barrel beneath her breast. Now keep good watch, and they kissed her. She heard the doomed men say, look for me by moonlight, watch for me by moonlight. I'll come to thee by moonlight, though hell should bar the way. She twisted her hands behind her, but all the knots held good. She writhed her hands till her fingers were wet with sweat or blood. They stretched and strained in the darkness, and the hours crawled by like years, till now on the stroke of midnight, cold on the stroke of midnight, the tip of one finger touched it. The trigger at least was hers. The tip of one finger touched it. She strove no more for the rest. Up she stood up to attention with the barrel beneath her breast. She would not risk their hearing. She would not strive again, for the road lay bare in the moonlight, blank and bare in the moonlight, and blood in her veins in the moonlight throbbed to her love's refrain. Tlot, 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 tlot. Have they heard it? The horse hoofs ringing clear. Tlot, 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 tlot in the distance. Were they deaf that they did not hear? Down the ribbon of moonlight, over the brow of the hill, the highwaymen came riding, riding, riding. The redcoats looked to their priming. She stood up straight and still. Tlot, tlot in the frosty silence. Tlot, tlot in the echoing night. Nearer he came, and nearer. Her face was like a light. Her eyes grew wide for a moment. She drew one last deep breath. Then her finger moved in the moonlight. Her musket shattered the moonlight, shattered her breast in the moonlight, and warned him with her death. He turned, he spurred to the west. He did not know who stood. He bowed with her head over the musket, drenched in her own red blood. Not till the dawn he heard it. His face grew gray to hear how Bess, the landlord's daughter, the landlord's black-eyed daughter, had watched for her love in the moonlight and died in the darkness there. Back he spurred like a madman, shrieking a curse to the sky, with the white road smoking behind him and his rapier brandished high. Blood red were his spurs in the golden noon, wine red was his velvet coat, when they shot him down the highway, down like a dog on the highway. And he laid in his blood on the highway with a bunch of lace at his throat. And still of a winter's night, they say, when the wind is in the trees, when the moon is a ghostly galleon tossed upon the cloudy seas, when the road is a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor, a highwayman comes riding, riding, riding. A highwayman comes riding up to the old inn door. Over the cobbles he clatters and clangs in the dark inn yard. He taps his whip on the shutters, but all is locked and barred. He whistles a tune to the window who should be waiting there, but the landlord's black-eyed daughter, Bess the landlord's daughter, plaiting a dark red love knot into her long black hair. Alfred Noyes. Yeah, my dad read that one. We had this book, this old book from when he was a kid. It had a lot of, it's full of poems, a poem book. Perhaps I'll find some more from that some other time. We don't have that book anymore. But while I'm on the subject of some, whatever I'm talking about, the So like I mentioned before, my dad died in 2005, and it was on September 24th. And the day after he died, I had some friends over. We were training martial arts in my garage. And afterwards, we were outside talking in my driveway. And there was this bird on my fence. And it kept demanding my attention. And I'm trying to talk to my buddies. They're about to leave, and I kept looking over at this bird. Like, what's going on here? And I finally asked my buddy Mike, I was like, what kind of bird is that? And he said, that's a woodpecker. I was like, oh, okay. Well, from the time I was a little kid, my dad would take me to Brown County State Park, same park where I would feed the deer by hand. And he would take me, all over. And his favorite birds were woodpeckers, especially the big pileated woodpeckers, kind of like Woody Woodpecker. But all kinds of woodpeckers. He would try to point them out to me. We'd be like in the middle of the woods somewhere, and he'd hear one, and he'd try to point it out to me. But I couldn't ever see him. I don't remember ever even seeing one. But I remember many, many, many times him trying to show me. But for some reason I couldn't see them. And that lasted until I was in my 20s. And I don't know why I couldn't see them. But that day after he died, and if my buddy Mike wasn't there, I had other buddies there that may have known what kind of bird that was, but he's the one that told me it was a woodpecker. And my buddy Ron was there, and I ended up losing my job the day after my dad's funeral. And I started getting really into birds. And I was blown away by the woodpecker. And my buddy Ron knew a lot about birds, but we never really talked about birds. I don't think I had anything against birds, but it wasn't, a huge thing for me. But then it was. And so since I lost my job, I had, nothing better to do but to sit and watch the birds. And I would get, I got all kinds of woodpecker food. I would put peanut butter and almond butter and stuff, just like smear it on my tree. I had this big, really tall white pine tree in my front yard. Pretty sure it was a white pine, real soft needles, real tall. And that tree became like this haven for woodpeckers. There were just all kinds of woodpeckers coming and going all day long. The big pileated woodpeckers, the red belly woodpeckers, which is the kind that was on my fence that day. And there were flickers and hairy woodpeckers and just all the downy woodpeckers, all the kind of woodpeckers that are around here would come to my tree. And there were all kinds of other birds coming there also. It was really amazing. And so then I became the one that can see the woodpeckers from far away. And I would take my kids to Brown County. I would take them to other parks around, and I could just little flicker in the distance, hundreds of feet away. I could see, oh, there's a woodpecker. And I could see him real easy. And they came to me at some very interesting times. Things were like beyond chance, beyond just like, oh, you saw a woodpecker? Well, woodpeckers live there, so it makes sense that if you're walking through the woods where there's woodpeckers that you would see one. Some of the things were beyond chance. Uh, the friend of mine that I was talking about, that I went on that vision quest for to find out what to do for her birthday, and had the realization of why the deer and the heart chakra actually makes a lot of sense. Uh, but she had said she had not really seen them before, and we went to this park, and sure enough, there's a big pileated woodpecker that I point out, and we're watching it for a while and listening to it. And she'd never seen one before. And she knew what it meant. She knew the story. She knew what it meant. And there were a couple other ones with her. And so the it's the point of what I'm doing is coming more and more to the realization that we don't know how much time we get here. I'm healthy and strong. I'm 39 years old. I could very well live to be 100, 150. Who knows with the technologies and stuff that we're gaining. But something might happen tomorrow. I might not wake up in the morning. Like, there could be a meteor that drops on my head in just a couple seconds. So if there's something you want to say to somebody, then say it. But also, you keep in mind that you might be dealing with a deer. So if you do too much too fast, you might scare them away. And if they come up to you too fast and you're coming in too fast at the same time, then that might kind of ruin everything. Also, it might spook them and have to try again later. Sometimes deer, they get too close and they realize that they just got complacent, and it's actually a tiger. So I think I'm going to wrap this episode up now. I hope that made sense. I hope you enjoyed the poems and stories. And so I would say, don't be afraid to say what you want to say to who you want to say it to, and don't be afraid to put yourself out there. I think there's a regret that I have. It's I didn't play guitar and sing with my dad enough. We'd pass the guitar back and forth, but it was almost like it was going to be too powerful. Like if we did that. And so if I could go back and redo something, it would be I would play and sing with him more. And so I've put some of my guitar playing on Instagram, but not a lot. But I haven't put my singing out there yet, and I don't fancy myself a good singer, but I think I'll do it anyway. Put out some more of my music and See if people like it. There'll be maybe some people that don't. It's good to listen to stuff you don't like too, I guess. So, anyways, I think I'll leave it at that again. I always try to close the show and then I end up thinking of 10 other things. But if you'd like to support the show, you can do so on Patreon. You can watch the videos right on Patreon now. There's it's Patreon, and just look up Fitness and Consciousness. And I'm keeping that up to date. So if you were listening to it before and saw that I wasn't keeping it up to date, I will be keeping it up to date now. It's all up to date, and I'm going to make sure it stays updated. And you can support the show for as little as $1 per month. So I support Jordan Peterson for $1 per month. So every few months, he has a cup of coffee on me. And you can also support the show on Podbean. And it also helps just to hit like, hit subscribe. All that stuff makes a difference. We are on YouTube. The video is on YouTube. And it's audio everywhere else, except Patreon. Like I said, has the video also. So any bit is appreciated, whether it's $1 per month, $5 a month, whatever you want to do is okay. More than okay. There are monthly expenses with the show. It doesn't really cost me a lot, but it takes a fair amount of time, and it does cost me a little bit, but I'm not doing it just for the money. I want to help people connect what they want to connect with. I want people to be, as I put in the description, I think the description is visible in some different areas, but so I want to stimulate thought into action. So I've had on just amazing guests. A lot of my strength training heroes have been on, and the show has been heard in about 100 countries, and it's just amazing. It blows my mind, but I'm not surprised. I set out from the beginning to have the best show on fitness and consciousness related subjects, and I think I'm going to be doing more, maybe by myself, explaining a few things, some stuff that's on my mind, some different concepts, different realizations. I think my next one will be like the dreams and visions. I've had some interesting things happen, and yeah. So anyways, thank you everyone for listening. Thank you for hitting subscribe. Thank you for hitting like. And if you want to contact me about the show, you can do so at fitnessandconsciousness@gmail.com. And if you want to be a guest on the show, if you're looking at my guest list and you see people like Stuart McGill and David Weck and Steve Cotter and all these famous trainers or authors and doctors, I also have on people that are just friends with a story to tell. They're not here to promote anything. And so I don't really care how famous someone is. It's huge to have the people of that caliber on the show, but we're all that caliber in a way. And so if you have a story to tell, if you have things that you want to talk about, just send me a message and we'll see if you're a good fit for the show. I'm pretty open. I won't accept just anybody, of course, but I'm pretty open. So if you have comments about the show ideas, fitnessandconsciousness@gmail.com. Thanks for tuning in. I will talk to you soon.